Hello everybody, and welcome back to my series, where I am covering the character of Jon Snow from the A Song of Ice and Fire books in detail. This is video 4 of 5, going over Jon's journey in A Dance with Dragons. So if this is your first time seeing this channel, I'd recommend going back and watching the first 3 videos in this series, going over Jon's journey in A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords. And with all that being said, let's jump right into Jon's final book, and debatably my favorite in the entire series, A Dance with Dragons. But first, it's worth noting that while Jon doesn't have any chapters in A Feast for Crows, he does appear at the end of one, and it's quite important. So before we jump into Dance, let's quickly go over Sam 1, A Feast for Crows. And this is a big chapter, because it's where the baby swap occurs. And while this is something we will cover from Jon's perspective in a bit, it's worth going over Sam's as well. Firstly, Sam notes that even though Jon is Lord Commander, he's established his residence in Donal Noye's modest quarters behind the armory, which I find to be incredibly symbolic of the relationship that Jon not only had with Donal Noye, but with the Night's Watch in general. Donal Noye was a man who gave Jon Snow perspective, the man who Jon spent the most of his time with, and the man who heavily influenced the man that Jon would become later on in Dance. So it's very telling that Jon would choose to live where he did, as a sign of respect to his dead friend, and in hopes of being a leader just like him. As Sam is walking towards Jon's office, he sees Gilly running out, distressed, due to the baby swap, but Sam doesn't know that yet. Sam then walks into Jon's office, and the air about Jon immediately feels different, at least from the way he did in A Storm of Swords. He's reading a parchment with Mormont's raven atop his shoulder. Even though he's only a few years older, this Jon is very clearly a much older Jon Snow than the one that we met in A Game of Thrones. But then Jon says something very telling. When discussing whether or not Jon Snow should send a letter to King Tommen, Jon says, "At Winterfell, Tommen fought my brother Bran with wooden swords. He wore so much padding he looked like a stuffed goose. Bran knocked him to the ground. Jon went to the window, yet Bran's dead, and the pudgy, pink-faced Tommen is sitting on the Iron Throne, with a crown nestled amongst his golden curls." And Jon's response to this shows his true feelings about the Southerners and his family. No matter how high Jon Snow climbs, he will never be able to let go of the love that he bears for his brothers and sisters, and he will never be able to get rid of the rage that he feels for those who took them away from him. Something we will further explore in Dance with Jaina Slynt. Jon then tells Sam that it's death and destruction he wants to bring down on House Lannister, not scorn by asking them for men on the wall, further showcasing how Jon will never fully let go of his ties to his family. But when Sam further pushes him to sign the page and ask for men in order not to pick sides in the war, Jon angrily agrees. Sam then tells Jon what he's learned about the others, right before Jon gives Sam the hard truth of the matter. Sam must leave and go to Old Town with Maester Aemon. Not because Jon wants them to, but because he knows Maester Aemon may die if he doesn't. The core of Jon's arc in A Song of Ice and Fire, and specifically in Dance, is that of moral dilemmas. Jon frequently finds himself in positions where there is no right answer, and he's just simply forced to pick the lesser of two evils. And the baby swap, along with sending Sam south with Aemon, is the first of many moral dilemmas we will see Lord Snow wrestle with. Sam pushes back against this idea, but Jon won't budge. Sam notes that, "Jon," he'd said, but Jon was gone. It was Lord Snow who faced him now, grey eyes as hard as ice. "You have no father," said Lord Snow, "only brothers, only us. Your life belongs to the Watch." Ironic, considering what Jon decides to do at the end of Dance. The next morning, it's time for them to leave, and Jon Snow is getting a lot of shit for his decisions. Gilly is heartbroken that he's made her swap her child, Sam is confused and upset that Jon is making him leave, and Maester Aemon knows this voyage will be the death of him. And Jon Snow, underneath his stoic shell, is heartbroken by the decisions that he has made, but he knows it's for the best. This chapter, and Dance in totality, is about Jon Snow making hard decisions, and truly having to kill the boy to let the man be born. The chapter then closes out on a quite somber note, where Jon says goodbye to Sam, and on the verge of tears tells him to pull his hood up, because Sam was getting snow in his hair. Have a swift, safe voyage, and take care of Aemon and the child. Jon smiled a strange, sad smile, and pull your hood up, the snowflakes are melting in your hair. A callback to the last time Jon and Robb saw one another, and Jon, throughout his story, frequently thinks about how Robb looked with snowflakes melting in his hair. It is twice now that Jon has had to leave a brother that he loved, and it breaks him. And with that, we get to Dance, but not Jon 1. Not yet. Before we get to Jon 1, we have to quickly talk about the prologue of A Dance with Dragons. Varamir Sixskins, the skin changer who disappeared at the end of Storm, is now dying in a hut, and he thinks of Jon for a bit, Jon's connection to Ghost, and what it's like when you die as a warg. Varamir thinks, "They say you forget," Hagen had told him, a few weeks before his own death. When the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast, but every day his memory fades, and the beast becomes a little less a warg, a little more a wolf, until nothing of the man is left, only the beast remains. Varamir knew the truth of that. When he claimed the eagle that had once been Oryl's, he could feel the other skin changer raging at his presence. Oryl had been slain by the turncloak Jon Snow, and his hate for his killer had been so strong that Varamir found himself hating the boy as well. He had known what Snow was the moment he saw that great white direwolf stalking silent at his side. One skin changer can always sense another. Mance should have let me take the direwolf. That would be a second life, worthy of a king. He could have done it, he did not doubt. The gift was strong in Snow, but the youth was untaught, still fighting his nature, when he should have gloried in it. And this little passage is incredibly important to the future of Jon's character. Firstly, the "they say you forget" line applies to Jon because at the end of Dance, he dies, and he will be dead for probably at least a few days, which means his soul and ghosts will have time to merge and change. And the second important aspect of this passage is that was a second life worthy of a king line. And to me, this is George giving obvious foreshadowing to Jon Snow's future in The Winds of Winter. Jon Snow will warg into Ghost, their souls will merge, making the line between man and wolf nearly disappear. And this newfound hunger and honest desire that Jon will have will bring him to Winterfell and to the north. But more on that later. For now, let's jump into Jon 1, A Dance with Dragons. Now Dance is Jon's book, which makes it my favorite book in the series, and while a lot of people don't love many of his chapters, I find Jon's journey trying to manage being Lord Commander incredibly fascinating. Jon 1 opens with him warged into Ghost, and before we even get into what occurs during this, it's incredibly telling that this book opens with Jon warged into Ghost. The first words written for this chapter are "the White Wolf," and Jon's final spoken word in Dance is "Ghost." Jon 1 begins where Jon 13 will end, with Jon's soul merging with his wolf's. The chapter begins with Ghost running beneath the moonlit sky, and he can feel his siblings, Nymeria and Shaggy Dog. He can taste the blood of the unicorn Shaggy Dog just killed, and smell Nymeria with her massive wolf pack in the Riverlands. His warging dream then ends, with him remarking how thick the cold has become, and how his brother, who smelt of summer, was deeper into that cold. Jon wakes to Mormont's raven jumping on his chest and shrieking his name at him. Snow! 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 Jon swings his pillow at it, missing, and then Dolorous Ed enters his chamber, asking him what he wants to eat. Jon remarks how insane it is that not long ago he was a steward, and now he's the Lord Commander. Jon remarks that there are still thousands of wildlings held captive after Stannis Baratheon's assault, and thousands more with Tormund. But when told of a baby who died after freezing to death, Jon becomes concerned about what will end up being a defining moment in his arc. The baby swap. Burning dead children had ceased to trouble Jon Snow. Live ones were another matter. 2 kings to wake the dragon. The father first, and then the son. So both die kings. The words had been murmured by one of the queen's men to Maester Aemon as he cleaned his wounds. Jon had tried to dismiss them as fever talking. Aemon had demurred. There is power in the king's blood, the old maester had warned, and better men than Stannis have done worse things than this. The king can be harsh and unforgiving. Aye, but a babe still on the breast? Only a monster would give a living child to the flames. Jon then thinks about his wolf dreams while taking a leak, and remarks that they are getting increasingly more powerful, that he can even remember them while he's fully awake, and this will be a through line throughout Dance. Jon remembering and engaging with his dreams more and more as the story progresses. He says Ghost knows that Greywind is dead, but that him sensing Shaggy Dog and Greywind is curious, considering Bran and Rickon are supposed to be dead as well. Jon curiously thinks that maybe Bran and Rickon have lived on in their wolves, which is again great foreshadowing of Jon living on in Ghost after his own death. Jon then goes to speak with Stannis, but on his way, one of the Queen's men challenges him to a fight, and even taunts him by calling him Lord Snow. But Jon honestly doesn't care. Jon from Jon won a Game of Thrones would have definitely accepted this challenge, but Lord Snow doesn't have time for petty bullshit anymore. I also want to say that this book is the book where Jon is thinking the most, which means we have a lot of analysis to get through. While walking up the stairs, a Dornish guard tells him that he thought it was cold at times in Dorne, but that he knew nothing compared to now. Jon thinks nothing, just like me, showing that the events of A Storm of Swords, and most importantly the death of Ygritte, still very much weigh him down. Jon then reaches Stannis' office, and remarks that while Ygritte was kissed by fire, Melisandre was fire incarnate. Jon thinks that Lyanna Mormont may have accepted Stannis as her king if she received a letter from Jon Stark instead of Stannis himself, but that it was too late for him to second-guess himself, showing that while he did make his decision, deep down it still bothers him. Just because he's accepted his reality doesn't mean he has to love it. Jon begins to talk to Stannis about how he can get the North to back him, but at least for now he's trying to use his words very sparingly, not truly trying to pick a side and not to be too involved with Southern politics. But this is an aspect of his character that he will struggle with as the story continues. Stannis then says, "The law ends at the wall, your grace. You could make good use of Mance." "I mean to," Stannis said. "I'll burn him, and the North will see how I deal with turncloaks and traitors. I have other men to lead the wildlings, and I have Raider's son. Do not forget, once the father dies, his whelp will be king beyond the wall." "Your grace is mistaken. You know nothing, Jon Snow," Ygritte used to say, but he had learned. The babe is no more prince than Val is a princess. You don't become king beyond the wall because your father was. And what makes this interaction so interesting is how Jon Snow is subtly trying to lead Stannis away from Mance's son, by explaining to him that wildlings don't use Westerosi succession rules as their own, so there would be no reason for Stannis to burn Mance's son. Jon then begins to carefully drip-feed Stannis information about Gilly, and how and why he means for her to go south, playing into Stannis' hate for the Lannisters by telling him that Gilly's son is a product of incest. At this point, Stannis is pressing the issue that he wants castles and land from the Night's Watch, but Jon won't budge, and their interaction is phenomenal. "You offer me empty lands and desolations, yet deny me the castles I require to reward my lords and bannermen. The Night's Watch built those castles, and the Night's Watch abandoned them. To defend the wall," Jon finished stubbornly, "not as seats for southern lords. The stones of those forts are mortared with the blood and bones of my brothers, long dead. I cannot give them to you. Cannot or will not. The cords in the king's neck stood out sharp as swords. I offered you a name. I have a name, your grace. Snow. Was there ever a name more ill-omened?" Stannis touched his sword hilt. "Just who do you imagine that you are?" "The watcher on the walls, the sword in the darkness. Don't prate your words at me." Stannis drew the blade he called Lightbringer. "Here is your sword in the darkness." Light rippled up and down the blade, now red, now yellow, now orange, painting the king's face in harsh, bright hues. Even a green boy should be able to see that. "Are you blind?" "No, sire. I agree these castles must be garrisoned." The boy commander agrees. How fortunate. "By the Night's Watch." Stannis then tells Jon that his father Ned was a wise man, and he would have given him the castles. And Jon takes this as a slight against his father, thinking never, with venom in his thoughts. The conversation then ends, with Stannis realizing Jon won't budge, and Melisandre decides to walk Jon back to the chambers after the conversation. He asks her if her fire visions are ever wrong, and she gives a telling response. "Never. That we priests are mortal, and sometimes are mistaken. This must come, for this may come." This is important, considering the fact that she looks into the fire later on, asks to see Azor Ahai, and sees snow, which many take as solid evidence that Jon is Azor Ahai, but she can be very well wrong. Snow is a foul omen, after all, and it's not concrete evidence that Jon is Azor Ahai. And personally speaking, I feel his story will be a much darker one in The Winds of Winter. The chapter then closes out, with Melisandre telling Jon, "You have so many enemies. Shall I tell you their names? I know their names. Do not be so certain." The ruby at her throat gleamed red. "It's not the foes who curse you to your face that you must fear, but those who smile when you are looking and sharpen their knives when you turn your back. You would do well to keep your wolf close beside you. Ice, I see, and daggers in the dark, blood frozen red and hard, and naked steel. It was very cold. It's always cold on the wall. You think so? I know so, my lady. Then you know nothing. Jon Snow," she whispered. Phenomenal foreshadowing, since Jon's story concludes this book being murdered and betrayed by his own people, with daggers when it's incredibly cold. All in all, Jon 1 is a great opening to Jon's journey. In Dance, it establishes how Jon is without a doubt more grown now, and that his journey this book will be far less of a physical struggle like he had in Storm, and much more of a mental and intellectual struggle, one that will have him manufacturing both great and terrible choices. Jon 2 is an incredibly important and interesting chapter, because this is the mirror to Sam 1, A Feast for Crows, the baby swap chapter. It opens with Jon freaking out about a letter he's been asked to sign, before Ed interrupts him, to tell him that Gilly is on her way. Jon remarks that he dreaded what he must do. When she walks in, she drops to one knee, and he picks her up, telling her that he is no king. She doesn't have to bend for him. He then tells her that he must tell her something. He thinks he almost said asks, but caught himself. Gilly then tells Jon to save Dalla's son from Stannis' fire, that he's just an innocent child, and didn't harm anyone. Jon responds by saying that only she can be the one to do that. Another woman would have shrieked at him, cursed him, damned him down to the 7 hells. Another woman might have flown at him in rage, slapped him, kicked him, raked at his eyes with her nails. Another woman might have thrown her defiance in his teeth. Gilly shook her head. No. Please no. The raven picked up the word. No, it screamed. Refuse and the boy will burn. Not on the morrow, nor the day after, but soon. Whenever Melisandre needs to wake a dragon, or raise a wind, or work some other spell requiring king's blood. Mance will be ash and bone by then, so she will claim his son for the fire, and Stannis will not deny her. If you do not take the boy away, she will burn him. I'll go, said Gilly. I'll take him. I'll take the both of them. Dalla's boy and mine. Tears rolled down her cheeks. If not for the way the candle made them glisten, Jon might never have known that she was weeping. Craster's wives would have taught their daughters to shed their tears into a pillow. Perhaps they went outside to weep, well away from his fists. Jon closed the fingers of his sword hand. Take both boys, and the queen's men will ride after you and drag you back. The boy will still burn, and you with him. If I comfort her, she may think that tears can move me. She has to realize that I will not yield. You'll take one boy, and that $1. A mother can't leave her son, or else she's cursed forever. Not a son. We saved him. Sam and me. Please, please, my lord, we saved him from the cold. Men say that freezing to death is almost peaceful. Fire, though. Do you see the candle, Gilly? She looked at the flame. Yes. Touch it. Put your hand over the flame. Her big, brown eyes grew bigger still. She didn't move. Do it. Kill the boy. Now. Trembling, the girl reached out her hand, held it well above the flickering candle flame. Down. Let it kiss you. Gilly lowered her hand. An inch. Another. When the flame licked her flesh, she snatched her hand back and began to sob. You will make a crow of him. She wiped at her tears with the back of her small pale hand. I won't. Kill the boy, thought Jon. You will, else I promise you, the day that they burn Dalla's boy, yours will die as well. Die, shrieked the old bear's raven. Die, die, die. Now I read all of this aloud, just to show how brutal this chapter is. This is one of the darkest moments in Jon's story. There is no sugarcoating this. In this moment, he is using his intellect to instill fear and guilt into Gilly. That way, she will do what he wants. Jon is using his power over her, harms her both emotionally and physically, and is just a huge dick, to be quite honest. But there is a reason, and that reason is complicated. The way Jon sees it, he values a child's life over the mother's happiness. And while it brings him great shame to treat her like this, someone that he cares about, he feels that he has to do it. It's his duty to make the best possible decision and to try and keep people alive. And if that means upsetting some people and becoming hated, so be it. Killing the boy and letting the man be born means having the guts to make the impossible decisions that no one else would ever want to make, and finding a way to live with yourself after the fact. We then find out when Sam enters the scene that the letter on Jon's desk is a paper shield Aemon wants to send to King Tommen in order to have plausible deniability and not take sides with the war between Stannis and Tommen. Jon doesn't want to sign this because deep down, he still hates the Lannisters. But in this moment, he is able to successfully kill the boy, be the bigger person, swallow his pride, and do what needs to be done. The conversation then continues, just as it does in Sam Want a Feast for Crows, just from Jon's perspective. But where this gets interesting is what Jon thinks when Sam pushes back on the idea of him going to Old Town. Sam tells Jon that he can't leave, that his father wouldn't allow it, and that he's scared, and Jon thinks, Kill the boy, Jon thought. The boy in you, and the one in him. Kill the both of them, you bloody bastard. You have no father. Only brothers. Only us. Your life belongs to the Night's Watch. So go and stuff your small clothes into a sack, along with anything else you care to take to Old Town. You leave an hour before sunrise. And here's another order. From this day forth, you will not call yourself a craven. You faced more things this past year than most men will face in a lifetime. You can face the Citadel, but you'll face it as a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. I can't command you to be brave, but I can command you to hide your fears. You said the word, Sam, remember? I'll try. You won't try. You will obey. In this moment, we have Jon, yet again, having to say and do something he doesn't want to. Jon loves Sam, he loves Aemon, and he doesn't want his friend and mentor to leave his side. But deep down, he knows it has to be done for the greater good. Jon is willing to sacrifice his own happiness and the short-term happiness of the people he cares about for the sake of the world itself. And this is something that he will continue to do throughout this book. Jon then thinks back to what Maester Aemon had told him the night before. You will have little joy of your command, but I think you have the strength in you to do the things that must be done. Kill the boy, Jon Snow. Winter is almost upon us. Kill the boy, and let the man be born. Jon then goes to sleep, and has a nightmare where he ripped both children from Gilly's arms, hacked their heads off, swapped them, and told her to sew them back on. Clearly demonstrating that subconsciously, Jon is carrying immense guilt inside of him regarding this decision. Jon is then walked by Ed, and remarks that in his wolf dreams his senses are sharper, that Ghost is truly more alive than he has ever been, foreshadowing his future death. Then, when Gilly is leaving, Jon thinks back to the first time they met, how she was scared of Ghost potentially tearing her son from her belly, but that it was never Ghost she should have been afraid of. It was him. Jon then says goodbye to his best friend Sam, and while holding back tears, he thinks of his brother Robb, and how he had snowflakes in his hair the last time that he saw him as well. After this, Jon begins talking with a brother named Giant, and they discuss battle plans for the future, and how Jon plans on sending Jaina Slynt to Greyguard with 30 men, partially because he knows he is a decent commander, and partially because he knows it's a shit job, and simply wants him away from Alliser Thorne and Jon. And now, these next few pages are some of my favorite in Jon's story. While Jon waits for Jaina Slynt to report back to him, he sharpens Longclaw, and thinks about not only his father, but how easily Longclaw could cut through Jaina Slynt's neck. Jon thinks, skin and fat, to part Slynt's ugly head from his body. All of a man's crimes were wiped away when he took the black, and all of his allegiances as well. Yet he found it hard to think of Jaina Slynt as a brother. There is blood between us. This man helped slay my father, and it is best to get me killed as well. And here is a good time to establish that Jon Snow doesn't kill Jaina Slynt because he has to alone, but because he wants to. As we have established over the last 3 videos, Jon Snow does not respond well to his family being disrespected, and Jaina Slynt was a man who played a key role in his father's execution. Jon hasn't forgotten it, and him literally sharpening his sword and thinking of using it to cut off Jaina Slynt's head is incredibly telling of the vengeance that Jon Snow desires. When Jon then tells Jaina of what he must do, Jaina pushes back, as Jon expected he would. Jon thinks, I am giving you a chance, my lord. It is more than you ever gave my father. You mistake me, my lord, Jon said. That was a command, not an offer. It is 40 leagues to Greyguard. Pack up your arms and armor, say your farewells, and be ready to depart at first light on the morrow. Further showing that even though you're supposed to leave your old life behind, even though you're supposed to stay out of southern politics, Jon Snow, when push comes to shove, simply cannot help himself. Jaina Slynt then calls Jon Snow a boy, which angers Jon, but he allows Slynt a night to think on it. The next morning, though, things just get worse, when Janus tells Jon to stick his order up his bastard ass. And honestly, screw it. I was trying not to read this chapter too much, but I just have to read these next 2 pages in their entirety, because fucking hell, they are just so good. As you will, Jon added to Iron Emmett. Please take Lord Janus to the wall, and confine him to an ice cell, he might have said. A day or 10, cramped inside the ice, would leave him shivering and feverish, and begging for release. Jon did not doubt, and the moment he is out, he and Thorne will begin to plot again. And tie him to his horse, he might have said. If Slynt did not wish to go to Greyguard as its commander, he would go as its cook. It will only be a matter of time until he deserts. Then, and how many others will he take with him? And hang him, Jon finished. Janus Slynt's face went as white as milk. The spoon slipped from his fingers. Ed and Emmett crossed the room, their footsteps ringing on the stone floor. Bowen Marsh's mouth opened and closed, though no words came out. Sir Alliser Thorne reached for his sword hilt. Go on, Jon thought. Longclaw was slung across his back. Show your steel. Give me cause to do the same. Half the men in the hall were on their feet, southern knights and men-at-arms, loyal to King Stannis, or the Red Woman, or both, and sworn brothers of the Night's Watch. Some had chosen Jon to be their Lord Commander, others had cast stones for Bowen Marsh, Sir Denis Mallister, Cotter Pike, and some for Janus Slynt. Hundreds of them, as I recall. Jon wondered how many of those men were in the cellar right now. For a moment, the world balanced on a sword's edge. Alliser Thorne took his hand from his sword and stepped aside to let Ed Tullett pass. Dolorous Ed took hold of Slynt by one arm, Iron Emmett by the other. Together they hauled him from the bench. No, Lord Janus protested. Flecks of porridge sprang from his lips. No, unhand me, he's just a boy, a bastard. His father was a traitor. The mark of the beast is on him. That wolf of his, let go of me. You will rue the day you laid hands on Lord Janus Slynt. I have friends in King's Landing, I warn you. He was still protesting as they half-marched, half-dragged him on the steps. Jon followed them outside. Behind him the cellar emptied, at the cage. Slynt wrenched loose for a moment and tried to make a fight of it, but Iron Emmett caught him by the throat and slammed him back against the iron bars until he desisted. By then, all of Castle Black had come outside to watch. Even Val was at her window, her long golden braid across one shoulder. Stannis stood on the top of the King's Tower, surrounded by his knights. If the boy thinks he can frighten me, he is mistaken, they heard Lord Janus said. He would not dare to hang me. Janus Slynt has friends, important friends, you'll see. The wind whipped away the rest of his words. This is wrong, thought Jon. Stop. Emmett turned back frowning. My lord. I will not hang him, said Jon. Bring him here. Oh, Seven, save us, he heard Bowen Marsh cry out. The smile that Lord Janus smiled then had all the sweetness of rancid butter, until Jon said, Ed, fetch me a block, an unsheathed longclaw. By the time a suitable chopping block was found, Lord Janus had retreated into the winch cage, but Iron Emmett went in after him and dragged him out. No, Slynt cried as Emmett half-shoved and half-pulled him across the yard. Unhand me, you cannot. When Tywin Lannister hears of this, you will all rue. Emmett kicked his legs out from under him. Dolorous Ed planted a foot on his back to keep him on his knees, as Emmett shoved the block beneath his head. This will go easier, if you stay still, Jon Snow promised him. Move to avoid the cut, and you will still die. But your dying will be uglier. Stretch out your neck, my lord. The pale, morning sunlight ran up and down the blade as Jon clasped the hilt of the bastard sword with both hands and raised it high. If you have any last words, now is the time to speak them, he said, expecting one last curse. Janus Slynt twisted his neck around to stare up at him. Please, my lord, mercy. I'll go, I will. No, thought Jon. You closed that door. Longclaw descended. "Can I have his boots?" asked Owen the oaf, as Janoslin's head went rolling across the muddy ground. "They're almost new, these boots, lined with fur." Jon glanced back at Stannis. For an instant their eyes met. Then the king nodded and went back inside his tower. Man, I absolutely adore this chapter. I completely forgot that we get the baby swap, Sam and Gilly leaving, and the death of Janos Slynt all in the same chapter. But on a more serious note, this execution is gold, because it's so unbelievably nuanced. Now, most people like to pick one of two interpretations regarding the execution. Option 1 is Jon killed Janos Slynt purely because he had to as Lord Commander, and option 2 is Jon kills him because he wanted to. And me personally, while there is a bit of both, I much prefer the interpretation that Jon wanted to kill Janos Slynt. From the time they meet, Jon hates this guy. He gives him a job he knows he won't like, and then sharpens his sword while thinking of killing him. He thinks of his father, the man Janos Slynt harmed, and the reason Jon hates him the whole time to begin with. And then, with his father's words behind his swing, he cuts off his head with one clean blow. To me, that just speaks volumes to Jon's desire for vengeance, a hunger that has always been a part of him. And one great parallel that I noticed upon reading this chapter is the difference between Robb's execution of Rickard Karstark and Jon's execution of Slynt. When Robb kills him, it's messy, taking multiple blows, and Robb gets covered in blood, almost like the action itself is being rejected by the gods. While Robb is trying to be like his father, in many ways he just can't be like him. But Jon, in this moment, much like Ned does in Bran 1, beheads a man with one clean stroke. In this chapter, Jon becomes consumed by the idea of killing the boy and letting the man be born. And with Stannis' nod of approval, Jon Snow is reassured in his decision. What a chapter. Jon 3 opens with Mance Rayder being burned. Although with hindsight, we know this isn't Mance, and instead Rattleshirt. But for this chapter, that doesn't matter, because Jon treats the man like he is Mance Rayder. Melisandre burns Mance's Horn of Joramun, thinking she's ended the ability to knock the wall down. A misdirect, further providing evidence for the theory that Sam is actually the one in possession of the horn. Mance then begins to shriek and burn, and Jon recalls the Dornishen's wife, the song that Mance had sung when they had first met early on in Storm. He thinks of Sam, of Gilly, of Ygritte, the guilt he carries knowing so many of his friends have died or suffered due to the decisions that he's made. With this guilt at the forefront of his mind, he tells his men to loose arrows at Mance Rayder. Mance is struck by 3 arrows, giving him a much quicker death. Jon remarks that now Mance's watch has ended. Jon then sees Lightbringer glowing, brighter than ever, making the wall itself pink with its flame. Jon wonders if this is truly the power of King's blood being burned. Ironic and a wrong assumption, further proving that Stannis' sword is more a byproduct of trickery than true magic. The Queen's men then allow the wildlings in, telling them that if they want to join Stannis' cause and be protected, they must burn a weirwood branch. Jon thinks a piece of the old gods had to die for the new ones to enter, while flexing his sword hand. And I find this burning of the weirwoods to be fascinating. We know that Stannis ends up trapped by a heavy snow on his way to Winterfell. Could that be the old gods punishing him for what he's allowing to happen here? And then something quite interesting occurs. Bowen Marsh approaches Jon and tells him, "This is a day I never thought to see." The Lord Steward had thinned notably since suffering a head wound at the Bridge of Skulls. Part of one ear was gone. He no longer looks much like a pomegranate, Jon thought. Marsh said, "We bled to stop the wildlings at the gorge. Good men were slain there. Friends and brothers. For what?" And this line is incredibly important, because it establishes the anger that the Night's Watch, and specifically Bowen Marsh has, with Jon's decisions in Dance. Up until this point, he had been a mentor and a friend to Jon, but from this chapter on, Jon will continue to piss him off, and stretch the rules of the Night's Watch, ultimately leading to the mutiny and Jon's death at the end of this book. Bowen continues to push back against this decision, telling Jon that allowing the wildlings into the gift isn't protecting the realm, that if they really were to unite with the Night's Watch, why not fight the others out there while the Night's Watch seals the wall? Jon agrees that while there is reason in his words, he disagrees because they would have no way to know what's coming if the wall is sealed, and that Stannis would never permit it to happen. And Bowen Marsh responds by saying, "Lord Snow, I am not the one to bear tales, but there has been talk that you are becoming too friendly with Lord Stannis. Some even suggest that you are a rebel in a turncloak, aye, and a bastard and a warg as well. Jaina Slynt might be gone, but his lies lingered. I know what they say." Jon had heard the whispers. He had seen men turn away when he crossed the yard. "What would they have me do? Take up swords against Stannis and the wildlings both? His Grace has thrice the fighting men we do, and is our guest besides. The laws of hospitality protect him, and we owe him and his a debt." Yet again, Jon Snow finds himself stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's damned if he does, and damned if he does not. If he doesn't help Stannis, the Night's Watch is screwed. If he helps too much, the Night's Watch is screwed. And that's what makes this book so fascinating. Much of Dance is Jon Snow making impossible decisions, and having to live with the consequences after the fact. They talk a little more about the death of Tywin and what it means, and it's clear that while Bowen Marsh does care for Jon, they fundamentally disagree on how to handle the Night's Watch. Jon is then asked by his old friends if he wants to eat with them and share some laughs, but his response is heartbreaking. He thinks Jon wanted nothing more. No, he had to tell himself. Those days are gone. The realization twisted in his belly like a knife. They had chosen him to rule, the wall was his, and their lives were as well. A lord may love the men that he commands, he could hear his lord father saying, but he cannot be a friend to them. One day, he may need to sit in judgment on them, or send them forth to die. Another day, the Lord Commander lied. Ed, best see to your own supper. I have work to finish. One of the most tragic parts of Jon Snow becoming a man and Lord Commander is the isolation that comes with his leadership. It's a mistake that he's making, and one that will cost him. A reasonable mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Jon needs friends at the Watch, and pulling away from his brothers will play a key role in his downfall. Jon then walks through the castle and courtyard, and he spots Val and daydreams about the life he could have had with her. He thinks of Ygritte and how she died, and all of a sudden he can taste blood in his mouth. He can feel the kill Ghost had caused, and he thinks that he is a man, not a wolf, further foreshadowing his death and the fact that he is slowly but surely merging with the direwolf. The chapter then ends with Jon thinking of the Azor Ahai prophecy that was in the Jade Companion, and how Stannis must be a fraud, considering Lightbringer is supposed to be hot and have the ability to melt men and foe alike. And by the way, the only thing we know that can do anything like that in the series is Daenerys' dragons, but more on that in her own series. Jon goes to sleep, looking at Mormont's crow, thinking that it's the only friend he has left. Not counting Ghost, of course, since Ghost is more a part of Jon than a friend. And the tragedy of Jon Snow, sleeping in Donal Noye's bed, the man who convinced him to be more friendly and be a true brother after he has just accepted his fate of being alone, is so unbelievably tragic. Jon 4 opens and immediately furthers the conflict and turmoil between Jon Snow and the Night's Watch. Due to the fact that there just isn't simply enough food to feed the Night's Watch, Stannis' men, and the wildlings, there is tension between Bowen Marsh and himself. Bowen Marsh is Night's Watch to the bone, and quite conservative with his beliefs of how the Night's Watch should proceed and act. He feels they should put themselves first, and he is admittedly against the inclusion of wildlings, considering they have killed so many of his friends. And while I personally disagree with many of Bowen's perspectives on how to handle the politics at the Wall, it's worth understanding that he isn't evil or inherently wrong. And Jon admits that when Bowen counsels him, there is logic to his thoughts, but Jon will continue to disregard what he says, which will eventually build to Bowen Marsh killing him. While they are looking through their food storage, Bowen Marsh says that they are running out of food and fast. Jon thinks Jon had been thinking that all the meat in the world was surrounding them. "You know nothing, Jon Snow." "How so?" he asked. "This seems a deal of food to me." And this is a great moment, highlighting the fact that for all of Jon Snow's intelligence, he is still a kid and rather naive. Something that I realize in hindsight is that Jon Snow was not ready to lead the Night's Watch. George has always constructed his story as a realistic version of typical fantasy tropes. In a more traditional story, Jon would become Lord Commander and be great at his job from the get-go, since he's the chosen one. But George has his characters be far more realistic. In A Game of Thrones, Jorah Mormont tells Jon that with a few years of stewardship under his belt, Jon would make a fine leader. But with Mormont dying and Sam manipulating events to get Jon in power, he is forced into a position that he isn't yet ready for. And tragically, this is the same thing that happened to his brother Robb, with both of their stories concluding with their tragic deaths at a young age. Jon then has to come to the difficult decision of cutting portions, something he knows will anger the Watch even more, but it has to be done. Jon remarks that about half of the Watch is already incredibly angry with Jon's decision to not close up the gate to the Wall, but that was a problem for another day. Jon then leaves the cellar and is summoned to speak with Stannis. When he gets there, he's told that Rattleshirt, who is secretly Mance Rayder, has been offered to join him. Jon is against the idea and believes he will just desert, but with the red ruby tied to his wrist, he will be loyal, or at least that's what Stannis tells him. Stannis then asks Lord Snow, "Tell me of Mor's Umber." The Night's Watch takes no part, Jon thought. But another voice within him said, "Words are not swords." The elder of the Greatjon's uncles, Crawfood they call him. A crow once took him for a dead and pecked out his eye. He caught the bird in his fist and bit its head off. When Mors was young, he was a fearsome fighter. His sons died on the Trident, his wife in childbirth. His only daughter was carried off by some wildlings 30 years ago. And this is an interesting development for Jon, because while he is consciously trying to help Stannis without pushing too far, he's treading on thin ice, and this is also a sign of him not being able to let go of the anger and bias that he has for what was done to his family during the War of the Five Kings. Jon continues to give info to Stannis and listen to his plans of war with the Boltons. When Stannis asks Jon to speak privately, he thinks, "I see." Jon's tone was wary. "What does he want of me? I have no love for Lord Bolton or his son, but the Night's Watch cannot take up arms against them. Our vows prohibit," which is incredibly ironic and great foreshadowing, considering at the end of the book, Jon decides to go south and kill Ramsay Bolton, forsaking his vows. But just a paragraph later, when Stannis tells Jon his plans to tear out Ramsay Bolton's throat, Jon's emotions overcome him, and he can't help but give aid to Stannis. Jon says, "You won't," Jon blurted. It was as if he just whacked a wasp's nest with a stick. One of the Queen's men laughed, one spat, one muttered a curse, and the rest all tried to talk at once. "The boy has milk water in his veins," said Sir Godry the Giant Slayer, and Lord Sweet huffed. "The craven sees an outlaw behind every blade of grass." Stannis raised a hand for silence. "Explain your meaning." Where to begin? Jon moved to the map. Candles had been placed at its corners to keep the hide from rolling up. A finger of warm wax was spilling out across the Bay of Seals, slow as a glacier. "To reach the Dreadfort, your grace must travel down the King's Road, past the river, turn south by east, and cross the lonely hills," he pointed. Those are Umber lands, where they know every tree and every rock. The King's Road runs along their western marches for 100 leagues. Moors will cut your host to pieces unless you meet his terms and win him to your cause. Very well, let's say I do that. That will bring you to the Dreadfort, said Jon. But unless your host can outmarch a raven or a line of beacon fires, the castle will know of your approach. It will be an easy thing for Ramsay Bolton to cut off your retreat and leave you far from the wall, without food or refuge, surrounded by your foes. Only if he abandons the siege of Mount Cailin. Mount Cailin will fall before you ever reach the Dreadfort. Once Lord Roose has joined his strength to Ramsay's, they will have you outnumbered, 5-1. My brother won battles at worse odds. You assume Mount Cailin will fall quickly. Snow, objected Justin Massey, but the Iron Men are doubtly fighters, and I've heard it's said that the mount has never been taken from the south. A small garrison in Mount Cailin will play havoc with any army coming up on the causeway, but the runes are vulnerable from the north and east. Jon turned back to Stannis. Sire, this is a bold stroke, but the risk. He thinks the Night's Watch takes no part. Baratheon or Bolton should be the same to me. If Roose Bolton should catch you beneath his walls with his main strength, it will be the end for all of you. And this is most definitely a fatal flaw and a moment in Lord Snow's command. And it's also one of the things that I love the most about Jon. Regardless of his position, power, and perspective, Jon Snow is stark to the bone. His bias is clear as day, and this is his first time obviously breaking and forsaking his vows for the sake of his family and dance. Something that will continue to worsen as the book progresses. Jon then comes to understand that Stannis means to take armor from the Night's Watch. He thinks, words may not be swords, but swords are swords. But Jon doubles down, telling Stannis to leave the wildlings at the wall, because if he takes them on his march, the North will never rally behind Stannis. So yet again, we have Jon forsaking his vows and putting the Night's Watch on the back burner to prioritize vengeance against those who harmed his family and his home. Jon then speaks with Stannis alone, and he learns that he means to attack regardless of what Jon has said. And Jon decides to triple down on helping Stannis. Jon tells Stannis, verbatim, that he will show him how to win, and his men as well. You'll find them from here. Jon spread his burned hand across the map, west of the King's Road and south of the Gift. Those mountains? Stannis grew suspicious. I see no castles marked there, no roads, no towns, no villages. The map is not the land, my father often said. Men have lived in the high valleys and mountain meadows for thousands of years, ruled by their clan chiefs, petty lords, you would call them, although they do not use such titles amongst themselves. Clan champions fight with huge two-handed greatswords, while the common men sling stones and batter one another with staffs of mountain ash. A quarrelsome folk, it must be said. When they are not fighting one another, they tend their herds, fish the Bay of Ice, and breed the hardest mounts you'll ever ride. And they will fight for me, you believe? If you ask them. Why should I beg for what is owed me? Ask, I said, not beg. Jon pulled back his hand. It's no good. Sending messages, your grace. You will need to go to them yourself. Eat their bread and salt. Drink their ale. Listen to their pipers. Praise the beauty of their daughters and the courage of their sons, and you'll have their swords. The clans have not seen a king since Torrhen Stark bent his knee. Your coming does them honor. Command them to fight for you, and they will look at one another and say, "Who is this man? He is no king of mine." And this is borderline hilarious. Jon is not only telling Stannis how to win this war, but giving him key information that only Jon could know, considering this is a family secret. And I really don't even have much analysis to add here. The text speaks for itself. Jon is quite literally breaking his vows for the sake of personal gain, and I love this for him. This is the kind of conflict and personal issues that make him so interesting. And then he somehow quadruples down by hand-drawing maps for Stannis and his journey. The chapter then ends with Jon understanding that what he has done is dig himself a massive hole. Jon 5 opens with Jon fearing the decisions he's made in these past few chapters. He thinks about Sam and Gilly, and wonders if in trying to save them, he has sent them to their graves. He remarks at how quiet Castle Black is now, that Stannis and his army have left. Bowen Marsh then approaches Jon to tell him that manning the wall is folly, and Jon becomes angry with Bowen Marsh, telling him that Lord Mormont is dead, and no one knows what he would have done because he was betrayed by his men. More foreshadowing of things to come between Marsh and Jon. Jon then begins down the King's Road to see how Molestown is, and he spots something very interesting. A massive ash tree that has been twisted by centuries of wind that now has a face on it and red leaves. The weirwoods seem to be growing and spreading, and I wonder if this tree is a byproduct of Bran's powers growing, and this face could be Bran from the future looking back at his brothers on the wall. Maybe, when Bran sees Jon laying in a bed of ice in Bran 3 A Game of Thrones, he was unknowingly seeing him through this specific weirwood. Then, a mile further, he sees another tree, with a face carved into it. Jon believes it's the wildlings, but he doesn't know how they could have got there when they're guarded. On a branch he spots a raven that screams the word corn, corn, corn. And I believe that this is the work of the gods, not the wildlings. Jon then arrives at Molestown, and remarks that because the freefolk were all hiding together in the cellars, they stink, and his brothers make fun of them for it. Jon saw one of his brothers wrinkle his nose and say something to the man beside him, some jape about the smell of freedom, he guessed. Too many of his brothers were making japes about the stench of the savages in Molestown. Pig ignorance, Jon thought. The free folk were no different than the men of the Night's Watch. Some were clean, some dirty, but most were clean at times and dirty at others. The stink was just the smell of 1,000 people jammed into cellars, and tunnels that had been dug to shelter no more than 100. And this is top-tier development that showcases all of what Jon has learned during A Storm of Swords. The wildlings are simply just people, same as him. Jon then looks for wildlings that he could choose to man the wall and help fight back against the others. He thinks back to Val's words, where she said, "There are wolves amongst these sheep still." Val had reminded him of that on his last visit with her. Free folk and kneelers are more alike than not, Jon Snow. Men are men, and women women, no matter which side of the wall we were born on. Good men and bad, heroes and villains, men of honors, liars, cravens, brutes. We have plenty, as do you. She was not wrong, though. Jon then begins to feed the wildlings, and the pain of rule is clear as day. He has to deal with his brothers being angry that he's giving out food, and he has to deal with the anger of starving wildling mothers, who scorn him for not giving enough. Yet again, Jon is damned if he does, and damned if he does not. Then, a fight begins, but Jon is able to swiftly end it, with one of the coolest moments in the entire series. With Mormont's raven on his shoulder, squawking, "Crow, crow, crow," Jon Snow waits for silence, and explains how they have to prioritize the fighting men, because that is who will protect them, and keep the others away. And then he uses this information as leverage, telling the wildlings that if they fight and join the Watch, they will have more food. A hard decision to swallow, but a necessary one. Jon then sees a young wildling girl who reminds him of Arya. Jon is even allowing girls, 16 and older, to come to the wall, to fulfill duties other than just fighting. Jon then tells them that he will not make them serve for life if they join, but if they don't listen to his command, he will have their heads. And Jon's plan works. In this moment, Jon is stronger and more powerful than he has ever been before. The boy from A Game of Thrones is all but gone, and the man before the wildlings is strong, determined, grounded, and intelligent. And the wildlings recognize this. Jon notes that Mance was right. The wildlings don't follow names, they follow strength. And Jon Snow, after walking alongside them, sleeping with them, fighting them, killing them, is now their leader. Because more than anything, he's strong. The chapter then ends with Bowen Marsh questioning Jon, asking him what happens when a rape occurs, when one of the women slit the throat of a brother, what happens if it's Tormund they must fight before the others. And Jon dismisses it, hoping it won't come to that. An unwise conclusion. For all of Jon's strength and intelligence, he isn't perfect, and these mistakes that he's making are starting to build. Jon 6 opens with Jon sending Alliser Thorne and 8 men off to range. Alliser protests, but Jon's word is final. Jon wonders, not for the first time, what happened to his uncle Benjen. When they leave, Jon thinks about how heavy his decision was, potentially sending off 8 men, 8 brothers to their death. But regardless, it's his responsibility to bear. Ed then tells him that he had a nightmare that he was Jon, and he had to make decisions and never got to rest. Jon responds by saying that Ed's nightmare is his everyday. Jon is then lowered into the yard by the cage and hears the sound of swordplay beneath, and he tragically thinks it reminded him of warmer, simpler days when he had been a boy at Winterfell, matching blades with Robb under the watchful eye of Sir Rodrik Castellan. Sir Rodrik too had fallen, slain by Theon Turncloak and his Ironmen, as he tried to retake Winterfell. The great stronghold of House Stark was a scorched desolation. All my memories are poison. Jon, in his frustration and loneliness, decides to take on 3 men of the Night's Watch at once, using Donal Noye's final sword that he smithed. Jon thinks that he wishes he got to put an edge on it before Donal died. But what's worth noting is this is a completely different Jon than the one who fought multiple men in Book 1 A Game of Thrones. In that chapter, Jon beats on his brothers for pride, so they would know they were beneath him. He was a bully. But now he is a teacher, informing his brothers where they went wrong and what they must do to improve, and the truth of what real battle really is like. When their fight is over and Jon has won, he overhears Rattleshirt taunting him. We know this is actually Mance Rayder, and Jon says Stannis burned the wrong men. No, the wildling grinned at him through a mouth of brown and broken teeth. He burned the man he had to burn, for all the world to see. We all do what we have to do, Snow. Even kings. Further foreshadowing, in a cryptic sense, that Mance is alive, and what they all saw was nothing more than a trick. They then have a brutal fight, and Jon gets his ass kicked. Mance absolutely overpowers and outdoes Jon in every sense of the word, and he ends up on top of Jon, tearing his visor off and telling him that if he had a dagger, Jon would be down an eye. But what's interesting is he does. Mance makes the conscious decision to not take his dagger from his waist and stab Jon, showing that while they are enemies, he does have a level of respect for him. Jon then thinks humbly. There is always someone quicker and stronger, Sir Rodrik had once told Jon and Robb. He's the man you want to face in the yard, before you need to face his like upon a battlefield. And this is outstanding advice, and gives great insight into Jon as a person. Jon has his strength and intellect through his humility, through his ability to accept his shortcomings and learn from his losses. A great trait to have, and one that I try to implement into my own life. Jon then receives a letter from the Dreadfort, from Ramsay Bolton, and he makes a distinction that the words are written in large, spiky words. Keep this in mind as we approach the end of the story. Jon reads the letter, and when he gets to the part about Ramsay marrying Arya, his heart stops. Jon thinks, he's to marry Arya Stark? My little sister? Jon could almost see her in that moment, long-faced and gawky, all knobby knees and sharp elbows, with her dirty face and tangled hair. They would wash the one and comb the other, he did not doubt. But he could not imagine Arya in a wedding gown, nor Ramsay Bolton's bed. No matter how afraid she is, she will not show it. If he tries to lay a hand on her, she'll fight him. Your sister, Iron Emmett said. How old is? By now, she'd be 11, Jon thought. Still a child. I have no sister, only brothers. Only you. Lady Catelyn would have rejoiced to hear those words, he knew. That did not make them easier to say. His fingers closed around the parchment, would that they could crush Ramsay Bolton's throat as easily. And this final line about Jon wanting to crush Ramsay's throat is important, because while he's able to somewhat control himself now, later on when he's supported by Tormund and receives a second letter, the pink one, he will bite and go through with his goal. And I also adore this aspect about Jon. Jon is not perfect. He is not Prince Charming. He has an edge to him. He is not against vengeance. He is not against rage. And more than anything, when it comes to his family, he is more than willing to draw blood. This to me is evidence of Jon being resurrected in a far darker state and more aggressive one, when we get to the Winds of Winter, but more on that later. When Jon is reading this, he is overcome with emotion, and when he hears Ghost claw at his door, he decides to step out into the yard and take a walk. He thinks, there is no way I can help her. I put all kin aside when I said my words. If one of my men told me his sister was in peril, I would tell him that was no concern of his. Once a man had said the words, his blood was black, black as a bastard's heart. Where am I going? What am I doing? Castle Black was still and silent, its halls and towers dark. My seat, Jon Snow reflected. My hall, my home, my command, my ruin. And then something incredible happens. Ghost brushes up against Jon's hand, and he gets some type of crazy instant warg link, where he's immediately able to smell 1,000 smells. He then, as Ghost, turns around and sees Ygritte, and for a second, his heart stops, until he realizes it's just Melisandre. And this moment is proof of the theory I presented all the way back in Bran 1 A Game of Thrones. I said then that I believed Jon was able to find Ghost because they had some sort of mental link when they were in close proximity, and Jon was able to hear himself through Ghost's eyes. Melisandre then tells Jon not to worry, that his sister isn't lost to him. Jon, still trying to stay true to his vows, says that he doesn't have a sister. He thinks those words were knives. Tragic words, considering when he is stabbed with knives later on, his final thought is about his sister Arya. Melisandre tells Jon that she's seen his sister riding on a horse, further providing evidence that she isn't always correct, considering the person who arrives at Castle Black on a horse later on is not Jon's sister but someone pretending to be. Melisandre then pets Ghost, and Ghost becomes strangely entranced by her. Jon remarks that in that moment Ghost's eyes seem to match Melisandre's, and when Jon calls him, Ghost doesn't listen, which he finds queer. And then she tells Jon what will happen in the future to the men he sent out with Alliser Thorne. Hear me now, Jon Snow. 9 crows flew into the White Wood to find your foes for you. 3 of them are dead. They have not died yet, but their death is out there waiting for them, and they ride to meet it. You sent them forth to be your eyes in the darkness, but they will be eyeless when they return to you. I have seen their pale, dead faces in my flames, empty sockets, weeping blood. And now, while Melisandre's visions aren't always spot on, the fact that she says the men will come back weeping blood is rather strange. She implies they'll be coming back as others, but we have never known an other to cry blood. What she seems to be describing in some sort of symbolic death, where the men of the Night's Watch turn into something resembling the weirwood trees. She also says that he sent them to be his eyes, but they will now be eyeless, which doesn't mean they won't serve Jon Snow and be able to see, just that they won't have human eyes. I think potentially that these three brothers, won't become others and die at their hands, but die at the hands of Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest, being blood sacrifices for the hive mind. What if the weirwoods are actually all individual people who have been sacrificed in the past, present, and future? The chapter then ends with Melisandre continuing to try and seduce Jon, to bring him to R'hllor. A thrilling chapter filled with tons of mysteries that I hope will be answered in the Winds of Winter. Now, before we get to Jon 7, we need to cover a very important chapter for the future of Jon's character, Melisandre's only chapter. The chapter opens with her looking into the flames of fire in hopes of finding Arya. That way she can further win over Jon Snow. But instead of finding Arya, she finds something else. A face took shape within the hearth. Stannis, she thought, for just a moment, but no. These were not his features. A wooden face, corpse white. Was this the enemy? 1,000 red eyes floated in the rising flames. He sees me. Beside him a boy with a wolf's face threw back his head and howled. And my interpretation of this is she is somehow seeing Bran and Bloodraven in the flames, and they can see her as well. And this is a crazy reveal, and could also explain why in the next chapter she is able to calm Ghost and even look at him like somehow all of this magic is linked. Almost like it's just a bunch of different radio stations playing separate music, but on the same frequency. Or you can interpret this as ice and fire clashing. Northern magic is linked to the trees, the old gods, the cold, the north, and ice. And Melisandre wants to burn down these trees and their power with her new god, a fire god. Maybe the clash of these two gods is the Song of Ice and Fire. We then get a lot of explicit foreshadowing for Jon Snow's future. Death, thought Melisandre. The skulls are death. The flames cracked softly, and their cracking she heard the whispered name Jon Snow. His long face floated before her, lined in tongues of red and orange, appearing and disappearing again, a shadow half seen behind a fluttering curtain. Now he was a man, now a wolf, now a man again. But the skulls were here as well. The skulls were all around him. Melisandre had seen his danger before, had tried to warn the boy of it. Enemies all around him, daggers in the dark. He would not listen. To break this down, line by line, the point where she says he was a man, then a wolf, then a man again, is George R. R. Martin to me confirming that when Jon dies at the end of this book, he will warg into Ghost, and then in Winds, come back to his physical body. And then the next point is the skulls and daggers. The daggers obviously represent the brothers of the Night's Watch, who will still be present, and the skulls represent the others. How when Jon Snow returns and is resurrected, his battle with the others will be incredibly important. Melisandre then admits that trying to decipher the fires is incredibly hard, and no one can do it perfectly. That it's an imperfect practice, and it hurts. Just before saying, I pray for a glimpse of Azor Ahai, and R'hllor shows me only snow. And many Jon Snow fans take this as explicit evidence that he is Azor Ahai. But to me, this doesn't track perfectly, because one, it assumes she is saying he is Azor Ahai, which I'm not sure she is. And two, if she was saying this, she admits before this sentence that her visions aren't law, and much of it is up to interpretation. She then goes to eat, and thinks of Jon. She says it's not food she wants, but Jon Snow. That while Jon isn't a perfect leader and has his misgivings about power, that he isn't naive, and he even drives her a little crazy by playing hard to get. She then goes outside after speaking with Mance and sees Jon dealing with the fact that 3 of the rangers he has sent out have come back as heads on spikes. We see Bowen Marsh angrily tell Jon that he should have never sent out rangers, and Melisandre takes note of his cold and angry tone. He seems furious in this moment. Jon then has to tell the other men of the Watch, who just came through the wall, what had happened and how many of them had died. And one of them breaks down and wails. Again, another instance of the Watch turning on Jon with every misstep or bad decision that he makes. She then asks him if they can speak privately, as she stares into his cold gray eyes. She even sees him flex his sword hand, the nervous tic that he has whenever he is in a highly stressful situation. She asked, "You have not asked about your sister," she said, as they climbed the spiral steps of the king's tower. "I told you, I have no sister. We put aside our kin when we say our words. I cannot help Arya, much as I..." And to finish his sentence, I believe this line would have been, "as much as I helped the 3 men who he feels he led to their deaths." But then Melisandre reveals that Rattleshirt is actually Mance, and that if Jon wants to save Arya, he can send Mance, since they have his son as a bargaining chip. And we know, going into this chapter, that Jon goes through with it. He commands Mance to go save his sister. And there is just so much to break down here. First of all, Jon knowing that Mance, the king beyond the wall, is alive, and not killing him, is him betraying the Watch, and letting his personal feelings for Mance and his sister get in the way of his duty. Allowing Mance to leave to rescue his sister is also breaking the vows because he's putting his family over the Watch. And at the end of the chapter, we have confirmation that the baby swap worked, because Melisandre still thinks that the baby is Mance's son, and Jon uses this lie as leverage to get his sister back. Hardly the honorable thing to do, and it's just so incredibly fascinating how George R. R. Martin is able to make this scene so complex. There are 3 different layers to Jon Snow's decision in this moment, and we're not even in his head. Just absolutely brilliant, and honestly, expect me to make a whole video about this chapter eventually, because it's just so great. Jon 7 opens up with a snowstorm subsiding, and Jon deciding to lead the new recruits beyond the wall, to the Weirwoods to say their vows. Ed advises against Jon going, but Jon tells him that a good leader leads his men. He doesn't hide behind them. Jon also says that while Snow is dangerous, with Ghost at his side, he knows he will be protected. The direwolf, and Jon by extension, are one with the Snow. When they begin their ride, Ghost runs off to hunt, and Jon worries, but not for Ghost. Jon thinks he wants to hunt, but what? Jon did not fear for the direwolf as much as for any wildling he might encounter. A white wolf in a white wood, silent as a shadow. They will never know he's coming. Jon then talks to Emmett about his struggles with the wildlings. In between chapters, Jon raised a castle and put the Spearwives and other wildlings there. He remarks that in many ways, Bowen Marsh was right, and Hardin's tower was a box of cinders waiting for a spark, and it was just a matter of time before conflict occurred. Jon wondered if he should have just let them all march to their death with Stannis. Ygritte's words haunt him. "You know nothing, Jon Snow." Jon Snow then smells one of his brothers. He thinks Jon smelled Tom Barleycorn before he saw him. Or was it Ghost? Who smelled him? Of late, Jon Snow sometimes felt as if he and the direwolf were one, even awake. The great White Wolf appeared first, shaking off the snow. A few moments later, Tom was there. "Wildlings," he told Jon softly in the grove. Jon brought the raiders to a halt. "How many?" "I counted 9. No guardsmen." Jon and co. then reach the Weirwood Grove, and Jon can feel the eyes watching him. He thinks that all those eyes are just like ghosts, the old gods. With swords drawn, they surround the wildlings, but Jon doesn't want conflict, and one of the new brothers, Leathers, is able to speak with the giant One, who is ready for a fight. He tells them that they are in a sacred place, and after looking at the Weirwoods with their judgmental bloody eyes, they all calm down. Jon Snow tells his brothers to put away their steel. There will be no blood shed today. He then offers the wildlings a chance to come back to the wall, giant included, and they are welcome if they are willing to fight for life. It's also interesting to note that the wildlings coming into the Weirwood Grove for safety is incredibly interesting. I wonder if this Weirwood Grove circle creates some kind of invisible barrier that the others can't cross, which further supports the idea that the wall is made of giant weirwood trees. Jon then kneels, says his words, and prays with his brothers. He thinks, "May those deaths be long in coming." Jon Snow sank to one knee in the snow. "Gods of my fathers, protect these men, and Arya too, my little sister, wherever she might be. I pray you let Mance find her, and bring her safe to me. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children," the recruits promised, in voices that echoed back through years and centuries. "I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. Gods of the wood, grant me the strength to do the same," Jon Snow prayed silently. "Give me the wisdom to know what must be done, and the courage to do it." And I love this scene. It's just so incredibly eerie, and the fact that Jon is praying to the old gods and re-saying his vows, while also consciously going against them with his thoughts by praying for his little sister Arya, someone who isn't supposed to be his sister, is incredibly tragic. Even after all this time, Jon Snow is more conflicted than ever with his vows. Jon then brings the wildlings back to the wall, giant and all, and even brings the two dead corpses with him, for reasons we're about to find out. When Jon gets back to his quarters, he finds a letter from Stannis that says, Stannis has taken Deepwood Motte, and burned the Greyjoy fleet. Jon thinks that while he's not supposed to take sides, he is satisfied, and even happy to hear this news. Further evidence that even while Lord Commander, Jon isn't completely loyal to the Watch. But the second half of the letter makes Jon uneasy. Stannis says that he will try and save Jon's sister, after he launches his battle on Winterfell. Jon thinks that Winterfell will be hard to crack, that if Stannis were to attack, he has to do it now, and fast. Jon wants to help. He already made plans to send Mance and Spearwives to save her, but he still thinks it's not enough. He's still conflicted. And yet again, we have another moment in this book where Jon Snow is stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's damned if he does, and damned if he does not. He's supposed to kill the boy and let the man be born, but he can't let go of the love that he has for his sister. How can Jon Snow grow as a man while letting go of the foundation that grounded him and got him to this point to begin with? Jon 8 then opens with Jon yet again forsaking his personal honor for what he feels is the best decision for the realm. Even though he promised Stannis that he would keep Val close by Jon's side, he's decided to send her beyond the wall, to find Tormund Giantsbane and hopefully bring him back. He thinks, "I am the sword that guards the realm of men," Jon reminded himself, and in the end, that must be worth more than one man's honor. Jon then thinks that the road beyond the wall is as cold as the belly of an ice dragon, and this is one of 4 times that he mentions an ice dragon in this book. He mentions it related to the Stars in a Storm of Swords as well, and then he mentions it 2 more times in relation to Old Nan's stories. Keep this in mind as we proceed. Val then kisses Jon on the cheek and tells him that she thanks him for the food and for the hope. Jon, lightly embarrassed, responds by saying that all he wants for thanks is Tormund Giantsbane, which is incredibly interesting and telling of what I said last video about Tormund in many ways being one of Jon's best friends. Jon then says that he knows Val will return because she's grown fond of the baby. Val responds by saying that she sings to herself and can't help if Craster's son listens. Jon, taken aback, wonders why Val would keep a secret. One word to Stannis about the swap, and Jon would be considered a traitor. Val then tells Jon that she's named the child Monster, before riding off into the woods. Jon wonders longingly if he would ever get to see her again. When she leaves, Mully, one of the guards, tells Jon that many of the men think Jon is a wildling at heart and a turncloak, and he keeps digging himself a deeper hole. Jon thinks, and the worst part of it all is they weren't wrong. Their words aren't just wind. Jon is very fond of the wildlings, and in order to survive, he is more than willing to let them south of the wall. When back at Castle Black, Jon thinks about how Ghost has been hunting further and longer, because at and around the wall, they are simply running out of food. While he is eating breakfast, Bowen Marsh, Orthel, and Septon Kellador walk towards his quarters, and tensions have never been higher. Jon notes that you can tell Bowen Marsh is furious, and Yarwick is asking for more men to build at Eastwatch. And Jon offers him the giant he brought to the wall last chapter, 1-1. Jon thinks about how Old Nan used to say giants ate men and mixed their blood with their porridge, but 1-1 is actually a pretty chill dude, and he doesn't eat meat, and beyond that, Jon tells him that leathers can translate and he can work well. So all in all, Jon Snow, yet again, has a progressive perspective about the wildlings and the way the wall can operate, and his brothers don't agree. But Jon does recognize that keeping him here is risky, because he has the strength to rip a man in half, if provoked, something that will occur right before Jon's tragic death. Bowen Marsh then tells Jon that he disagrees with Iron Emmett being moved to Long Barrow, and moreover, he believes letting a savage wildling like Leathers become masters at arms is disgraceful, and so do many men at the Wall. Jon wants to ask who and how many, but in truth is scared of the answer. To make matters worse, Bowen Marsh calls Satin a whore, and tells him that the men find it insulting for him to be Jon's steward. Moreover, the men would never follow a whore into battle. Guess all that talk of one's past being left behind when they joined the ranks was a load of bullshit. Huh, Bowen Marsh. And now is as good as time to ever to say that the Night's Watch is a load of bullshit. Not a single one of them stay true to the words, and they are anti-human. To not love, to forget your past, to forget who you are, is anti-human. And speaking personally, I find many of Jon's decisions in this book to be objectively sound, if it wasn't for the Night's Watch resisting necessary change. Jon becomes angry with Bowen's final statement, and tells him that the men have followed worse, and honestly, Bowen Marsh just needs to shut his fucking mouth. But then, Mormont's Raven screams, "Corn, corn, kill," and that kill line is out of place. It doesn't fit with the bird's usual vocabulary. This, to me, is either Bloodraven, Bran, or Benjen trying to warn Jon that Bowen Marsh is going to kill him. Jon is then asked why he is keeping the corpses of the wildlings in the cellar, and he flat out tells him that he wants them to rise again, but chained, that way he can study them. He thinks that Aemon would see the logic behind this, and that Sam would as well, even though he'd be scared. But not these men. They see what Jon is trying to do as abominable. Septon Kellador tells him he will pray for Jon to have wisdom, and Jon, out of patience, pushes back by saying, "We could all do with a bit more wisdom." The conversation then gains intention when Jon flat out tells them that he sent Val out, betraying Stannis so that way he could get Tormund Giantsbane and whoever he's with on their side of the wall. Septon Kellador made the sign for the star. Orthel Yarwick grunted. Bowen Marsh said, "Some might call this treason. These are wildlings, savages, raiders, rapers, more beasts than men." "Tormund is none of those things," said Jon, "no more than Mance Raider. But even if every word you said was true, they are still men, living men, human, as you and me. Winter is coming, my lords, and when it does, we living men will need to stand together against the dead." And then the conversation gets even worse. Jon tells them that many wildlings have fled to Hearthome, because a witch named Mother's Mole had told them that their salvation would be there, and ships would come to bring them away. The three men remark that Hearthome is cursed, that 600 years ago the wildlings settled there, and the town burned so hot that the Watch thought it was the sun rising in the west. Bowen Marsh remarks that it's a good thing if the savages burn. Jon flexed the fingers of his sword hand. Cotter's Pike's galleys sail past Hearthome from time to time. He tells me there is no shelter there but the caves. The Screaming Caves, his men call them. Mother Mole and those who followed her will perish there, of cold and starvation. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Thousands of enemies, thousands of wildlings, said Bowen Marsh. Thousands of people, Jon thought. Men, women, children. Anger rose inside him, but when he spoke, his voice was quiet and cold. Are you so blind, or is it that you do not wish to see? What do you think will happen when all these enemies are dead? Above the door the raven muttered, Dead, dead, dead. Let me tell you what will happen, Jon said. The dead will rise again in their hundreds and their thousands. They will rise as whites, with black hands and pale blue eyes, and they will come for us. He pushed himself back to his feet, the fingers of his sword hand opening and closing. You have my leave to go. They left without another word. And this is such a great moment in Jon's story. Throughout this entire book series, he's gained perspective, and all of that perspective he gained is coming full circle here. He knows and completely understands that the wildlings, Night's Watch, and Southerners are all just people, but the others, the cold, the death, that is something else. And if humanity wants to survive, they need to set aside their petty differences and work together to fend off the cold. But unfortunately, as we will see moving forward, the Night's Watch is just far too stubborn for its own good. Jon 9 opens with Queen Selyse and her party arriving at Castle Black, and when Jon sees Shireen, he immediately thinks that she's incredibly ugly, which is super mean, but also really quite funny. But Jon is respectful when talking to her. This chapter has Jon trying to balance his command as Lord Commander while dealing with the Queen and her party, who are quite difficult people. When she is introducing her men, she introduces someone Jon doesn't recognize, Tycho Nestoris, an emissary of the Iron Bank of Braavos. Queen Selyse complains that Eastwatch, where she was staying, is no longer safe, and she means to stay at the Night Fort. Then one scares Patchface, and the Queen's men nearly start to fight with the giant. This is important foreshadowing, considering something very similar will happen in Jon 13. Jon then asks to speak with the Iron Banker alone, so they return to his chambers. The Braavosi breaks down to Jon that the Crown owes a lot of money to the Iron Bank, that way back in Book 1, Robert's reign left the realm in debt, and the reason the banker is here is to tell Stannis that the Iron Bank will back him if Stannis will repay them once he is on the throne. Tycho bows his head and says, "We who serve the Iron Bank face death full as often as you who serve the Iron Throne. Is that whom I serve?" Jon Snow was no longer certain. "I can provide you with horses, provisions, guides, whatever is required to get you as far as Deepwood Motte. From there you will need to make your own way to Stannis, and you may well find his head upon a spike. There will be a price." And this is another interesting development for Jon Snow. Here we see him engaging with Southern politics for the sake of having leverage with the North. Jon Snow continues to stretch the boundaries here of what he's allowed to do as Lord Commander. Jon ends up speaking with the banker for over 2 hours. His goal is to get to the banker's ships so he can pick up the wildlings from Hearthome and receive a loan from the bank to buy more food till the spring. In exchange, Jon will help him reach Stannis. Jon, a bit drunk, hears of talk of dragons in Braavos and jokes that they could use a dragon up here. Potential foreshadowing for the Winds of Winter. Jon then walks into the hall after their conversation, and Axel Florent, the Queen's right-hand man, is drunk and asking a vow. Jon thinks that he knows they know he let Val go to meet with Tormund, and tensions are rising at the Watch. Jon retreats to his cellar, and thinks about the tremendous loan he just took out. He knows the Watch won't be happy with him, and paying this loan back in the spring will be heartbreaking. But Jon would rather the Watch be broke than dead. Jon then dozes off, but wakes to who he thinks is Arya arriving at the wall. Jon thinks that he felt 15 years old again. He wanted to believe it could be Arya. He wanted to see her face again, to smile at her and muss her hair, to tell her she was safe. She won't be, though. Winterfell is burned and broken, and there are no more safe places. But the girl is not Arya. It is Alys Karstark, and she is here to escape a rotten betrothal that she is only engaged with for her name. She says that she's come up to the last son of Eddard Stark, that she fears for her life, no Stannis cannot help because he will die in the Battle of Ice, and ends the chapter begging Jon to protect her. Jon 10 opens up with a wedding. Jon remarks that the wind is as cold as the breath of the ice dragon that old Nan used to speak about in her stories. And this wedding will be disastrous for Jon's future with the Night's Watch. Jon has wed Alys Karstark to the new Magnor of Thenn, Sigorn, as to bridge the gap between the wildlings and the north. To make matters worse, it is Melisandre and her Fire Lord of Light R'hllor that are wedding the two, and Jon is also the one walking Alys down the aisle. And many of the men of the Night's Watch are furious with Jon in this moment, viewing this as Jon directly getting involved with southern politics and betraying his oaths. To make matters worse, a few days prior, Cregan Karstark, one of the men hunting Alys, came up with 4 men to get her back, and Jon killed one of them and imprisoned the rest. Jon Snow has now drawn blood in southern politics as Lord Commander. After the wedding is concluded, Jon and Melisandre talk about the fires. Jon asks her what she has seen, and she says that she hasn't been able to see much other than snow. She says she sees Jon every time she looks, though, and the daggers in the dark are getting closer. She tells him that she is mortal, like him, and can make mistakes, but she's sure that he must keep the wolf close. Jon tells her that Ghost is never far, so it's not to worry, which is important considering today, January 15th, George announced that Jon Snow will have chapters in The Winds of Winter, which means Jon successfully warged into Ghost, and that would only have happened because he was close. Jon then goes to speak with Cregan Karstark, and his anger with Jon for protecting Alys and marrying her to the Magnar is as clear as day. He says, "I see what you are, Snow, half a wolf and half a wildling, baseborn get of a traitor and a whore. You would deliver a highborn maid to the bed of some stinking savage. Did you sample her yourself first?" he laughed. "If you mean to kill me, do it, and be damned for a kinslayer. Stark and Karstark are one blood. My name is Snow. Bastard. Guilty of that, at least." Jon thinks about how he would like to cut off his head and give it to Lady Alys as a wedding gift, but that if he did, he would plunge himself further into southern politics, and people would say that he was killing Northmen to give their castles to wildlings. But Jon truly doesn't know what to do. If he kills him, he will betray the Watch. If he lets him live, he will do everything he can to tear apart the wedding. He wonders what his father would do, or what his uncle would do. He thinks, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." Jon then returns to the hall, where the wedding feast is taking place, and Alys Karstark seems to be flirting with him, just a bit. She tells him that when she has her castle, food, and people, she will remember what he had done for her. Jon then receives a letter from Eastwatch that says they have sent ships to Hardhome to save the wildlings, which brings him some relief. But he then hears 2 blasts coming from the wall, which means wildlings. Val has returned. Jon 11 is an incredibly important chapter, because it details Tormund's deal with Jon. It opens up with an incredibly funny paragraph. "That day, Tormund bellowed often and loudly. He roared, he shouted. He slammed his fist against the table so hard that a flagon of water overturned and spilled. A horn of mead was never far from his hand, so the spittle he sprayed when making threats was sweet with honey. He called Jon Snow a craven, a liar, and a turncloak, cursed him for a black-hearted, buggering kneeler, a robber, and a Karen Crow, accused him of wanting to fuck the free folk up the arse. Twice he flung his drinking horn at Jon's head, though only after he had emptied it. Tormund was not the sort of man to waste good mead. Jon let it all wash over him. He never raised his own voice, nor answered threat with threat. But neither did he give more ground than he had come prepared to give. Tormund then agrees to join Jon's ranks and serve under him. Jon recites his vows and hopes he is doing the right thing, but truth be told, he was unsure. And this to me is what makes Jon such an interesting leader and person. He can never know if he's making the right choice in the moment, because more often than not, there isn't an objectively correct decision for him to make. He just has to make the best of the situations he finds himself in. Tormund then asks Jon what happened to the little lad that he knew, and Jon thinks they made him Lord Commander. They then share a laugh when Tormund says he won't give him the giant ring he has wrapped around his member. But then the tone shifts when Tormund tells Jon of his son who died in his sleep and awoke with pale blue eyes. Tormund tells Jon, with tears in his eyes, that was hard. Very hard. Jon then walks out of the wildling tent and sees the wall in its crystal glory. Jon remarks that on days like this the wall seemed beautiful. He then calls for Ghost and sees him coming to him with Val at his side. Jon thinks that they look as if they belong together. Val, with her blue eyes and blonde hair, seems to entrance Jon. He remarks that it had been a long time since he had seen a sight so lovely. Jon could also be saying that he wants to be with Val, that he would look good with her, considering him and Ghost are one and the same. Jon remarks that she may not be a princess, but that she would make a worthy wife for any lord. They then talk on horseback while riding back to the wall, and Jon is able to convince her to kneel before Queen Selyse, to make the wildlings coming to the wall seem like a more digestible meal. But deep down he knows that no matter what he does, the Watch will not be happy with him. It's also worth mentioning that going into Winds, I believe Val will play an integral role in Jon's story, possibly as his wife. The line, "she would be as good for any lord," may come back around in Winds when Jon is king in the north. Maybe he will take this wildling princess as his bride, furthering the tie between himself and the wildlings. As further evidence, the next line they say to one another reminds me of Jon and Ygritte. Jon tells Val to follow him to the queen, and she responds by saying, "The crow commands, the captive must obey," in a playful manner. And the vibe of this conversation is one of two people who are definitely interested in one another. They then enter Queen Selyse's chambers. Jon tells her that the wildlings will be coming through the wall in 3 days' time, 4,000 strong, with 80 giants, and they will man the castles on the wall. However, there is one issue. Selyse will only accept this if they agree to bend to the Lord of Light, which Jon says were not part of the terms he made with Tormund. But Selyse won't budge, and Jon leaves her chambers with Val. Val then tells him that Shireen's grayscale will wake and doom the Seven Kingdoms. Maybe the dragon Stannis will birth from stone isn't a dragon at all, but his daughter's grayscale. Val then demands that Jon take Monster from this tower and give him to Val so he doesn't die from the grayscale. She tells Jon that Shireen is already dead, even if they refuse to see it. Jon, already annoyed, goes to the top of the wall to meet with Bowen Marsh. While at the top, he looks over the edge of the wall and gazes down upon the killing ground where Mance Rayder's host had died. He wondered where Mance was now. Did he ever find you, little sister? Or were you just a ploy he used so I would set him free? It had been so long since he had last seen Arya. What would she look like now? Would he even know her? Arya Underfoot. Her face was always dirty. Would she still have that little sword he'd had Mikken forge for her? Stick them with a pointy end, he told her. Wisdom for her wedding night. If half of what he heard of Ramsay Snow was true, bring her home, Mance. I saved your son from Melisandre, and now I'm about to save 4,000 of your free folk. You owe me this one little girl. He then looks to the sunset in the west and flexes his sword hand, haunted by all the things and people he has lost along the way. Bowen Marsh, the Septon, and Yarwick then reach the top of the wall, and Jon tells them to walk with him. and then he breaks the news of Tormund to them. Bowen Marsh touches the scar on his face that he received from defending the wall against the Weeper, one of the most vile wildlings. And Jon sadly tells him that while it angers him to say, he cannot pick and choose which wildlings to have peace with. If there is to be peace with the wildlings, it must be peace for all. Even the Weeper. If he were to say the words and join the Black, the men he's killed, the women he's raped and blinded, it all gets washed away. Bowen Marsh then asks an important question. Is Jon planning on feeding all of these people? And Jon tells him that the wildlings will pay for it with the wealth they have, and they will buy food from the surrounding areas. But he doesn't tell them about the loan from the Iron Bank. The men call the wildlings savages that can't be trusted, and Leathers protests that the wildlings are people, just like them, and that they even worship the same gods as the Starks in Winterfell. Jon takes it a step further by telling them that part of the agreement with Tormund is he's taken their sons as hostages, that every young boy will either help the Watch personally or be wargs. That way the wildlings can't rebel, and that if someone were to step out of line, Jon Snow will behead their child personally. This seems to work for most of the men, but Bowen Marsh won't budge. No matter what Jon says, he is against all of this. And then his rage gets to a boiling point. He says that what Jon is doing is treason, that he's openly breaking the vows, but Jon, enraged, pushes back. He says, "I know what I swore," Jon said, the words. "I am the sword in the darkness, I am the watcher on the walls, I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of man. Were those the same words you said when you took your vows?" They were, as the Lord Commander knows. "Are you certain that I have not forgotten some? The ones about the king and his laws, and how he must defend every foot of his land, and cling to each ruined castle? How does that part go?" Jon waited for an answer. None came. "I am the shield that guards the realms of man. Those are my words. So tell me, my lord, what are these wildlings, if not men?" And this, my friends, is what I like to call top-notch character development. If you remember Jon from Game of Thrones, he thought the wildlings were vile, that they were distinctly different from himself, and the enemy at the end of it all. But it turns out they are just people, just like him. The chapter then ends with Jon saying the thing. "Winter is coming," Jon said at last, breaking the awkward silence, and with it the White Walkers. "The wall is where we stop them. The wall was made to stop them, but the wall must be manned. This discussion is at an end." And in many ways, I find this to be Jon Snow successfully killing the boy and letting the man be born. Him closing out of this chapter, flexing his sword hand, and saying his father's words is to me a full circle moment. The boy who we met in Book 1 is gone, and Jon Snow is now a man who has inherited his father's words and wears them with a certain weight. Which brings us to Jon's second to last chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire, Jon 12. The chapter opens with a dream. That night he dreamt of wildlings howling from the woods, advancing to the moan of war horns and the roll of drums. Boom, doom, boom, doom, doom came the sound. 1,000 hearts with a single beat. Some had spears, some had bows, and some had axes. Others rode on chariots made of bones, drawn by teams of dogs as big as ponies. Giants lumbered amongst them, 40 feet tall, with mauls the size of oak trees. "Stand fast," Jon Snow called. "Throw them back." He stood atop the wall alone. "Flame," he cried. "Feed them flame." But there was no one to pay heed. "They are all gone. They have abandoned me." Burning shafts hissed upward, trailing tongues of fire. Scarecrow brothers tumbled down, black cloaks ablaze. "Snow!" an eagle cried, as foemen scuttled up the ice like spiders. Jon was armored in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. As the dead men reached the top of the wall, he sent them down to die again. He slew a graybeard and a beardless boy, a giant, a gaunt man with filed teeth, a girl with thick red hair. Too late, he recognized Ygritte. She was gone as quick as she had appeared. The world dissolved into a red mist. Jon stabbed and slashed and cut. He hacked down Donal Noy and gutted Deaf Dick Follard. Corrin Halfhand stumbled to his knees, trying in vain to staunch the flow of blood from his neck. "I am the Lord of Winterfell," Jon screamed. It was Robb before him now, his hair wet with melting snow. Longclaw took his head off. Then a gnarled hand seized Jon roughly by his shoulder. He whirled. And this dream is fascinating. First of all, it's a callback all the way back to Tyrion 2, A Game of Thrones, where Tyrion says he knows Jon has had dreamt about killing his brother. But beyond that, I believe this dream is symbolic of many things. First of all, his guilt. Jon cutting down all his fallen friends, lover, and brother, to me is symbolic of the guilt that he feels for the decisions that he's made. But more than anything to me, it shows all of the different lives he's lived, all the wants he's had, all combining and clashing in one moment. This is Jon's subconscious cracking under the weight of the decisions he's had to make, the loss he's experienced, and the things that he knows he must still do. Specifically the crows calling out Snow as if they are talking to Jon, but he doesn't know which one. Are they calling out to the wildling who slept with Ygritte, the Stark who threw snowballs with his brother, or the man of the Night's Watch who sharpened swords for Donal Noye? This is a choice that has haunted Jon his entire life, and it's a choice that will reach its conclusion next chapter. Jon then realizes the gates are being opened, and he doubts his decisions. He says he wishes that any one of the mentors he had were the ones making the choice, but it was simply too late now. And right after, thinking he wished his uncle was with him now, Mormont's Raven calls him his full name for the first time, almost as if it's someone trying to reach him in his moment of need. Jon then brings his men to the gate. He thinks about how fragile of a situation he finds himself in, but that it needs to be done. And with that, he opens the gate and changes the world forever. The wildlings begin pouring in, and Jon remarks that so many of them look like they are already half dead, starved and dying. He thinks that for the most part, they all just look like regular people who are scared. The wildlings take all day and night passing through, and Tormund remarks that he wished he had the Horn of Winter to blow and this would go much quicker. Jon hears this and he can't help but wonder where the true horn is. Jon then asks Tormund about the others, and he tells them that they are always around, that even if you don't see them, they're always clinging to your heels, waiting, always waiting. Tormund then gives a haunting description. That night, Tormund turned his face. "I know," said Jon Snow. He turned back. "You know nothing. You killed a dead man. I heard it. Man's killed 100. A man can fight the dead. But when their masters come, when the white mists rise up, how do you fight a mist, crow? Shadows with teeth, air so cold it hurts to breathe, like a knife inside your chest. You do not know. You cannot know. Can your sword cut cold? We will see." Jon thought, remembering the things that Sam had told him, the things he'd found in his old books. Longclaw had been forged in the fires of old Valyria, forged in dragon flame and set with spells. Dragon steel, Sam called it, stronger than any common steel, lighter, harder, sharper. But words in a book were one thing. The true test came in battle. "You are not wrong," Jon said. "I do not know. And if the gods are good, I never will." And this description of the others is just so haunting. And I'm pretty sure we've yet to see these wispy versions of the others. The only time we really get to see a group of them is the prologue, at least this description of them, and even then it's still kind of different. So I wonder if we'll get to see a closer look at them in The Winds of Winter. The wildlings then continue to pour through the gate and build speed as night descends, out of fear of the others. Jon takes note of a skin changer and a massive boar that enter the wall. Jon worries it could mean trouble for him and Ghost. But then when every wildling is through the gate, Jon returns to Castle Black, and remarks that it seems like life has been breathed into the castle, that lights are on where he's never seen them, and grown men are having snowball fights in the yard. This brings him a strange sense of happiness, a happiness that is quickly undercut by a letter from Maester Harmune, who told Jon Hardhome is a disaster, with dead things in the water all around, wildlings eating their dead, and the ships are falling apart. And with that, the chapter ends, and Jon notes that the real war has just begun. And with that, we get to Jon 13, A Dance with Dragons, his final chapter, which also happens to be the chapter I had George R. R. Martin sign because it means so much to me. And before I continue, I just think it's important to take some time and sit with how far we have come with this character. These videos have been incredibly fun and therapeutic for me, and I just want to say thank you to anyone and everyone who's been following along with me. It feels like with every chapter, experiencing Jon's growth has helped me grow a little bit as well, and I hope you feel the same way. But with all that being said, let's jump right into Jon's final chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire. Jon 13 opens with Jon speaking to Queen Selyse, asking her for aid to help the women and children at Hardhome. She simply responds by telling him to let them die. But Jon doesn't care, and declares that he will lead a ranging personally to save him. He then goes to leave, but Melisandre stops him on the stairs and asks him where Ghost is, and he tells her asleep in Jon's chambers, so he doesn't attack the boar or scare the queen's men. She tells him he must keep him close, which reminds me of how, right before the Red Wedding, Catelyn told Robb to keep Grey Wind close. But Jon doesn't want to hear it from her. He doesn't want her advice. He asks her where his sister is, angrily, mocking her. Jon then returns to his chambers, and remarks that Ghost is the most restless and aggressive he's ever seen him, even trying to bite one of the brothers. Jon thinks it's because of the boar, but I believe it's because Ghost can sense the betrayal coming. If you remember, Grey Wind was also restless right before the Red Wedding. Jon then summons Bowen Marsh and Yarwyck to hear what they have to say about the ranging, to save the wildlings, and their anger with Jon is plain as day. They tell him openly that they don't approve of the wildlings that are already at the wall, and that they hope as many as possible die. Women, children, babes, it doesn't matter. And Jon comes to understand that there is no getting them to see his perspective. Then, when they go to leave, Ghost sniffs them, and his tail goes straight, implying that he can smell the betrayal in them already. Jon then goes to the hall to discuss the ranging with Tormund, and while they are breaking bread together, Jon receives the pink letter. And while the question of who actually wrote this letter is a bit up in the air, it doesn't matter that much right now, because the outcome is the same for Jon because he believes it's Ramsay. The letter reads, "Your false king is dead, bastard. He and all his host were smashed in 7 days of battle. I have his magic sword. Tell his red whore. Your false king's friends are dead, their heads upon the walls of Winterfell. Come see them, bastard. Your false king lied, and so did you. You told the world you burned the king beyond the wall. Instead you sent him to Winterfell to steal my bride from me. I will have my bride back. If you want Mance Rayder back, come and get him. I have him in a cage for all the north to see. Proof of your lies. The cage is cold, but I have made him a warm cloak from the skins of the 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. I want my bride back. I want the false king's queen. I want his daughter and his red witch. I want his wildling princess. I want his little prince, the wildling babe, and I want my reek. Send them to me, bastard, and I will not trouble you or your black crows. Keep them from me, and I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it." It was signed, Ramsay Bolton, Trueborn Lord of Winterfell. And in many ways this letter is a load of BS, potentially. There are tons of theories about this letter online, and all of them have the same conclusion. Whoever wrote this letter is lying, and is just doing it to try and provoke Jon into coming south. It's Westerosi rage bait, and it works, because it plays into all of Jon's anger and insecurity. It plays into his fear of his sister's life, his anger that Winterfell, the place he was raised in, has been burned and is being ran by awful people. It plays into the baby swap, it plays into his desire for Val, and most importantly, it plays into his rage that he feels when his family is disrespected. And then it happens. My favorite moment in Jon's entire story. Tormund asks, "What do you mean to do, Crow?" Jon flexed the fingers of his sword hand. The Night's Watch takes no part. He closed his fist and opened it again. "What you propose is nothing less than treason." He thought of Robb, with snowflakes melting in his hair. Kill the boy and let the man be born. He thought of Bran, clambering up the tower wall, agile as a monkey, of Rickon's breathless laughter, of Sansa brushing out Lady's coat and singing to herself. "You know nothing, Jon Snow. He thought of Arya. Her hair is tangled as a bird's nest. I made him a warm cloak from the skins of the 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. I want my bride back. I want my bride back. I want my bride back. I think we best change the plan, Jon Snow said. And this moment is Jon Snow incarnate. It's all of the conflict he's ever felt, summed up in one overwhelming thought. And for the first time, he does something that he's yet to do this entire story. He makes a choice for him, by him. One of the most fascinating parts about Jon Snow's character is the fact that he's a man who seeks to be an active character, but is forced into a reactionary role. Almost every decision regarding Jon is either made for him or he's manipulated into committing to them himself. In A Game of Thrones, he is manipulated into joining the Night's Watch by Ned and Catelyn. While he expresses an interest in the Watch, he doesn't actually know if he wants to go truly, and more importantly, he has a very naive idea of what the Watch currently is. But Catelyn wanting him gone, and Ned wanting him away from the South, makes the choice for him to leave Winterfell permanently. And when he actually gets to the Wall, and it comes time to say his vows, he feels pressured by those around him, and more importantly, he knows that he has no home to go back to. So while he isn't gun to his head forced to say the words, in his eyes he doesn't have anything else. Then, in A Clash of Kings, he wants to fight and die beside the Half-Hand, but instead he's told to join the Wildlings, to gain info on them, and then return to the Wall. Then, with his relationship with Ygritte, while he does care for her, he was essentially forced into having sex with her, at least for the first time. He's then also in between a rock and a hard place, because he feels he has to betray her for the Watch. Then, at the end of Storm, when he finally thinks he can return to some sense of normality, Sam and Aemon manipulate the Watch into naming Jon Lord Commander, a role he wasn't ready for and didn't want. Hell, even the gods themselves, with Mormont's Raven, seem to be trying to push Jon a specific way. Throughout this entire book series, every character wants Jon to be what they desire for him to be. Except one person, Tormund. Tormund is Jon's closest friend at this moment, and his dynamic is one that often goes unnoticed. Tormund represents to Jon freedom in the truest sense, and Tormund is the only person who truly sees Jon and respects him for who he is, not for who he wants him to be. For example, Bowen Marsh and co. spend the whole book telling Jon what he needs to do, or what they disagree with, but in this moment when Jon receives the pink letter, Tormund simply asks him what Jon means to do. So for the first time in Jon's story, he makes a decision. He decides to break his vows and commit to saving his family, and he has the person who represents freedom in the truest sense backing him. Jon and Tormund then enter a massive hall that is holding hundreds of people, both Night's Watch and freefolk, and Jon tells him what he plans to do. The Night's Watch takes no part in the Wars of the Seven Kingdoms, Jon reminded them when some semblance of quiet had returned. It's not for us to oppose the bastard of Bolton, to avenge Stannis, to defend his widow and his daughter. This creature who makes cloak from the skins of women has sworn to cut my heart out, and I mean to make him answer for those words. But I will not ask my brothers to forswear their vows. The Night's Watch will make for Hardhome. I ride to Winterfell, alone, unless... Jon paused. Is there any man here who will come stand with me? The roar was all he could have hoped for, the tumult so loud that the 2 old shields tumbled from the walls. Sorin Shieldbreaker was on his feet, the Wanderer as well, Torrig the Tall, Borrig, Harl the Huntsman, and Harl the Handsome both, Ygin Oldfather, Blind Doss, even the Great Walrus. I have my swords, thought Jon Snow, and we are coming for you. Bastard. Yarwick and Marsh slipped out, he saw, and all their men behind him. It made no matter. He did not need them now. He did not want them. No man can ever say I made my brothers break their vows. If this is oath-breaking, the crime is mine, and mine alone. Then Tormund was pounding him on the back, all gap-toothed grin from ear to ear. Well-spoken, Crow. Now bring out the mead. Make them yours, and get them drunk. That's how it's done. We'll make a wildling out of you yet, boy. And for the first time in his entire life, Jon Snow is free. And regardless of whether or not you believe this is a wise decision, this is the first time Jon Snow has made a decision, truly on his own, for him, in his entire life. And it's brilliant. But just when things are looking up, just when Jon's arc is hitting a high point, tragedy strikes. One had killed one of the Queen's men, tearing him apart limb from limb, and Jon tells the men of the Watch to calm down, to put their steel away, not realizing that the daggers in the dark weren't for one. They were for him. "No blades," he screamed. "Wick, put that knife away," he meant to say, when Wick Whittlestick slashed at his throat. The word turned into a grunt. Jon twisted from the knife, just enough so it barely grazed his skin. "He cut me." When he put his hand to the side of his neck, blood welled between his fingers. Why? For the Watch. Wick slashed at him again. This time Jon caught his wrist and bent his arm back until he dropped the dagger. The gangling steward backed away, his hands upraised as if to say, "Not me, it was not me." Men were screaming. Jon reached for Longclaw, but his fingers had grown stiff and clumsy. Somehow he could not seem to get the sword free of its scabbard. Then Bowen Marsh stood there before him, tears running down his cheeks. For the Watch, he punched Jon in the belly. When he pulled his hands away, the dagger stayed where he had buried it. Jon fell to his knees. He found the dagger's hilt and wrenched it free. In the cold night air, the wound was smoking. "Ghost," he whispered. Pain washed over him. "Stick them with the pointy end." When the third dagger took him between the shoulder blades, he gave a grunt and fell face first into the snow. He never felt the fourth knife, only the cold. And with that, Jon Snow has died. And like I've been saying for 3 videos now, the tragedy of Jon's final thoughts being of Arya is beyond words. And the fact that his final word is ghost. Jon reaching out to the other part of himself, warging into his wolf, and living on, merging with the beast. This chapter is brutal. Jon Snow is a character that means so much to me, and while he didn't do a perfect job as Lord Commander, to see him get killed because the Watch is incredibly close-minded and hypocritical is a bitter pill to swallow. Moreover, Jon Snow dying the second he made a choice of his own accord is so tragic. But with that, Jon's story in A Song of Ice and Fire comes to a pause. I say pause because today George R. R. Martin confirmed that he will in fact have chapters and wins, which means that while my reading and breakdown of every Jon chapter is on pause for now, my analysis is far from over. I still have one more video to make in this series, where I will be going over where I think Jon's character will end up in The Winds of Winter. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned, because it's coming. With all that being said, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. This series means so much to me. I feel like I've put so much of myself into this. I've made so many friends along the way, had so many great conversations. I want to say a massive thank you to all the people who have helped along the way, my Patreons, the people who talk to me in my Discord server about the videos, my good friends who always give me new ideas to bounce off of, and just everyone who's been with me on this journey. I appreciate you more than you know, and I sincerely hope to catch you in the next one. Peace.